Your brother's trying to get back on the plane.
In Yellowjackets, the wilderness emerges as a character that drives the characters in their actions. Although we never see any entity as such, the wilderness is always there as a threatening presence. It's always looming somewhere out there as an entity that has a mind of its own, or so the characters think. We don't really know whether it's real or something created in the mind, but it sure as hell plays a pivotal role in the survivors' descent into chaos and savagery. Before we go into our explanation of what we know about the wilderness, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to the channel. It's a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. What exactly is the wilderness? If we're to take it at face value, the wilderness appears as a deserted forest where the girls are stranded after a plane crash. They're all out in the open, each left to fend on their own, but as the story unfolds, it becomes clear that this locale isn't just a physical environment. The survivors begin to connect to it. Characters like Lottie form spiritual bonds with it. The wilderness becomes a god, dictating their beliefs and actions. This connection to the wilderness deepens with time, and soon the group begins to tear apart as they descend into insanity. It triggers something insanely primal in the survivors that locks their fates in a way that would trouble them even as adults. Now, exactly what do we know about the nature of the wilderness? Honestly, not much, but fans have come up with several theories, so let's dive into those.
What are you gonna do to stop me, Coach?
The supernatural force theory. Wilderness as a real force. This theory speculates that the wilderness is a real supernatural entity with a specific motive. First of all, it's hungry for sacrifice. Death, survival, and pain often come off as a requirement or ritual in the show. The characters often face circumstances that encourage violence, death, and submission to forces they have no control over. They're helpless to its will. The wilderness feeds off these sacrifices, both in literal and symbolic forms. For example, when the group engages in brutal acts like sacrificing one of their own, it's framed as a necessary step. They just had to do it to keep the group alive or to maintain their survival. The wilderness demands offerings. Secondly, the supernatural force often changes preferences when it comes to who survives and dies. You see the chaotic and unpredictable nature of the wilderness in this, and this seems to shift its focus throughout the series. For instance, we see that characters like Jackie and Nat are likely to be dead, but the wilderness changes its preference. This is very similar to the idea of a sentient entity with its own mind, much like a mythological deity or natural force with unpredictable moods. The wilderness has control over the events that unfold. It can be the character's survival or their rescue at the end. Only certain characters are rewarded with rescue after they please the wilderness. It's kind of like the concept of divine retribution. The wilderness is like a force that grants favors or relief only after certain conditions are met. For instance, the tragedies or escapes are often a direct result of the character's interactions with the wilderness. Their actions, whether in appeasing the force or succumbing to it, will lead to either their downfall or their salvation. So you see, the supernatural element comes off as more than just a backdrop to the story. Rather, it's an active force that shapes their fates. Third, from weird visions to the appearance of the Antler Queen, there are strong indications that something otherworldly might be controlling or manipulating the survivors in the wilderness. Ty's sleepwalking episodes, in which she discovers the symbol trees, brings to life the supernatural in the wilderness. Then there's the Greek feast-like ritual where the survivors resort to cannibalism. They could be acting under the influence of some malevolent force. The supernatural theory might even explain the erratic behavior of the characters and their descent into darker primal instincts. The scene where the survivors feast on Jackie's body implies that the group's descent into cannibalism is not due to starvation, but possibly a ritual. They're influenced by the wilderness or the spirits that inhabit it. For instance, Lottie, who had never studied French, fluently speaks the language during a seance. I'm thinking of possession or communication with an unknown entity. Lottie is not consciously aware of her actions, so it could be a supernatural force taking over her body or voice. Lottie even says, "You must spill blood or die," so it could be an external force that compels the group to perform violent acts. This could be a malevolent supernatural entity manipulating the group into doing these things. The figure of the man with no eyes following Thaisa and leading her to the symbols is another supernatural thing to have happened. His ominous presence defies logic. There's really no rational explanation, or at least none that Thaisa finds. This presence could be a supernatural force or a spirit guiding or haunting Thaisa. And finally, one fan even argues that the wilderness could be haunted by the spirits of old inhabitants, miners, the cabin man, and his family. They were probably driven insane by mercury poisoning, leaving behind restless spirits. These spirits may be causing the bizarre and violent things in the show. All of this points really strongly in favor of the supernatural theory, where the wilderness is indeed a dark force looming out there. It has a mind of its own, it dictates people, and it chooses who it will save. But then, there are other theories as well, with some fans wondering if the wilderness can even choose. Choice theory. Can the wilderness choose? This theory about the wilderness making choices is pretty fascinating if you think about it. This theory also frames the wilderness almost as an entity that has a mind of its own. It's very similar to the previous one, but here, instead of the wilderness actively doing things to people, it just exists with its negative energy so that weak people fall prey to it. It wants to spill blood, prevent escape, and maintain control. It targets people who are easy to influence, people who would do pretty much anything to survive. The wilderness exists as an entity that draws people into violence and even cannibalism. It chooses people. Now, let's see what makes someone more vulnerable to the wilderness. Characters like Lottie and Shauna fit this mold perfectly, as they are key participants in the blood-spilling events given their thirst for blood and violence. They have something wild inside them, so when they're out in the wilderness, their innermost demons come out. They feel at home. Their mental savagery reflects the physical savagery they see around them. It just resonates, you know? At the same time, characters like Laura Lee are portrayed as moral opposition to the wilderness and its motives. Laura Lee doesn't spill blood. In fact, she tries to escape and even influences others like Lottie, so when she dies, it feels as if her death is the result of her being an obstacle to the wilderness. Let's come back to Jackie. This one's more ambiguous. She doesn't spill blood, but then she doesn't try to leave either. She doesn't even participate in the cannibalistic rituals. Her death seems to be a form of punishment for not contributing to the wilderness's bloodlust, especially after the failed hunt at Doomcoming. Now, Crystal, while her death seems accidental, her good relationship with Misty is crucial here. Remember, Misty is one of the wilderness's favorites. It's possible that her death was a way for the wilderness to protect Misty. Javi represents a character who doesn't participate in the violence, and his death seems to be a direct result of him preventing someone, specifically Natalie, from hiding. The wilderness doesn't want anything to interfere with the bloodshed, and Javi's actions do just that. Now, the survivors are those who are most aligned with the wilderness's twisted needs, whether it's spilling blood or facilitating violence. Lottie, Shauna, Natalie, and Misty all play significant roles in this. Shauna in particular stands out as a major figure in the blood-spilling narrative. Her eating of Jackie's ears is one of the first acts of cannibalism, but Travis and Natalie are the ones at risk in the adult timeline, especially since they're less likely to spill blood in the way the wilderness demands. The wilderness might manipulate them further, especially since Lottie is tied to both of their fates. Lottie has actually become the most vulnerable to the influence of the wilderness. Van's survival is interesting. In fact, Van's multiple near-death experiences are intriguing. The wilderness may not be actively trying to kill her, at least not during those specific incidents. Rather, it tries to manipulate the group dynamic through her and the people around her. The wilderness might target Van again if she doesn't become a true believer in its ways, kind of like Lottie. The wilderness chooses people who perform these acts. It chooses who lives and who dies. Its choice is often based on sacrifice, gore, and submission. Is the wilderness even real? Fans agree that there exists a supernatural interpretation of the wilderness that explains some of the unexplained events. Many fans point to oddly scary moments that defy rational explanation. For example, Darktai seems to know where strange symbols are, even though she isn't consciously aware of them. Some also argue that Lottie's visions, like speaking French during a seance, could point to supernatural abilities or possessions. The idea that the girls may have stumbled upon symbols that already existed before their crash is kind of creepy if you think about it. It hints at something ancient and possibly supernatural. The setting of the wilderness itself feels very charged with energy and life. There's a dark presence, especially during moments like the mysterious bird deaths or Ty sleepwalking to certain places. We do acknowledge that. But then there are several fans who don't agree with the supernatural theory, and they argue in favor of a more rational and scientific explanation. The wilderness is real in a different sense. Being in an isolated, harsh environment can alter perceptions. Experiences like feeling watched, hearing noises at night, or experiencing strange feelings are common in real life if you're out in the wild. The girls' distorted perception could result from the mental and physical toll of their environment rather than a supernatural force. The argument against supernaturalism has valid points. Most of the supernatural elements can be explained by a combination of psychosis, malnutrition, and extreme stress. The girls' hallucinations, such as seeing or hearing things that aren't there, could be explained by their severely compromised mental health. This is similar to the symptoms you can observe in solitary confinement or extreme deprivation. Psychological and trauma responses can be a crucial factor here. We see mass hysteria as the girls break down mentally. Trauma, isolation, and starvation drive them insane. You can say that the wilderness acts as a metaphor for their trauma. It suggests that they perceive the supernatural as a manifestation of their collective psychological distress. Hallucinations and delusions play a big role here. Mental illnesses like sleepwalking, schizophrenia, and depression may explain much of the bizarre occurrences. The girls' mental states deteriorate. Their exposure to harsh elements might have made them prone to auditory and visual hallucinations. Lottie develops psychic-like abilities. Shauna and Natalie's behaviors also seem inexplicable much of the time. The wilderness can also be seen as an allegory for trauma. If the wilderness represents the manifestation of their trauma, then it's not a literal supernatural force. The wilderness reflects how trauma, guilt, and emotional repression haunt the girls in their present-day lives. The wilderness isn't real in the traditional sense, but it is deeply felt by the characters. You can argue that there's a lot of intentional ambiguity. The show's creators have deliberately kept the line between supernatural and psychological effects blurred. This allows the audience to interpret events in different ways. It sort of mirrors how the characters themselves can't fully comprehend the nature of their experience. Many fans believe that the answers to these complicated questions will never be given definitively, as the show is more about exploring how individuals cope with trauma rather than providing concrete answers. Fans also speculate that the show may go in the direction of Lost, which left many supernatural elements unresolved. Unfortunately, this is risky. It can potentially frustrate viewers, but the show's ambiguity has been seen as part of its charm. This allows fans to explore multiple theories, whether supernatural or psychological, without committing to a definitive answer. Is there a wilderness god, or is it simply faith? You can argue that the wilderness is a mental construct and that it comes into existence through sheer belief. This theory rejects the supernatural force theory. Religious faith can be a psychological phenomenon for some people. The teens probably form a belief system around the wilderness. Here, they view it as a god that demands sacrifice. This is very close to the natural development of a lot of religious faith. It suggests that when we're faced with unknown and traumatic events, humans often create supernatural explanations to make sense of their experiences. There are several signs and coincidences that point to this. We see things like the bear walking up to the girls or the snow falling on Jackie's fire. This can be explained as coincidence or cosmic oddity. Driven by starvation, trauma, and psychological instability, the girls give meaning to these random events. This is how they construct a belief in an entity. This mirrors how many religious rituals and symbols are formed in isolated communities facing existential threats. Mental illness and hallucinations could be another factor. The girls are dealing with intense trauma and mental health struggles like Lottie's premonition and Ty's DID. These states distort their perceptions of reality. It might make them see supernatural things where there are none in the first place. The hallucinations and visions they experience could be tied to their psychological conditions and not to a real wilderness god. The wilderness god as a reflection of human needs could be another theory. The creation of rituals could be a means of control. The girls perform rituals like sacrifices, prayers, and offerings. Now, this serves social and psychological purposes. They provide comfort, structure, and a sense of control in an otherwise chaotic environment. These rituals may not be connected to a real supernatural entity, but they offer the girls the illusion of control over their fate. Religion has social and cultural functions. The creation of a religious system in the wilderness helps the girls cope with their trauma. Lottie, as the shaman, embodies the role of a leader who interprets these strange events as divine signs. It reinforces the group's belief in the wilderness god. So, in this theory, a wilderness god is a reflection of faith, not fact. The science of toxins. This theory is rooted in hardcore scientific facts. A fan theory suggests that methane emissions from a nearby mine could be causing hallucinations and distorted visuals. We know that methane has psychoactive powers. It can play with your mind while you suspect nothing. In the confined space of their cabin, methane poisoning could trigger hallucinations and affect normal mental states with delirium. Then there's the mercury poisoning theory. This one argues that mercury poisoning from the land or water could be the reason behind the delirium faced by the survivors. Constant exposure to mercury can cause paranoia, hallucination, and violent outbursts. This actually does align with the characters' violence and hysteria. These theories are grounded in science, and they give a more rational explanation for the way the characters descend into madness. And it could also explain their heightened sensitivity to the strange and unsettling occurrences in the wilderness. Together, these theories suggest that environmental factors could be playing a crucial role in the survivors' deteriorating mental health. The uncanny symbol. What exactly is the symbol and what is its role in the wilderness? The symbol is a recurring presence. It appears in both the past and present timelines. Although its meaning remains unclear, it's often associated with death and sacrifice. The first time we see the symbol, it's on a tree near the crash site. Later, it's found in a cabin where the survivors discover a dead body. Lottie senses an ominous presence linked to the symbol. In her seance, the symbol again comes. As the story progresses, the symbol is incorporated into rituals, especially by Lottie. She uses it in a blood ritual involving Shauna, which then results in a mass bird death. Ty also becomes involved, discovering trees marked with a symbol. So far, its purpose remains unknown. In the adult timeline, the symbol resurfaces in mysterious postcards linked to Travis's death. Lottie even claims that Travis used the symbol to better understand the wilderness. Theories about the symbol's meaning have raised a lot of debate among fans. Some say it's supernatural, some say it's linked to alchemy, some say it may even represent cannibalism. This interpretation comes from the symbol's resemblance to a girl hanging upside down. Now, this is similar to the gruesome cannibalistic rituals seen in earlier episodes. Remember when Shauna eats Jackie's ear? Other theories propose that the symbol is connected to a form of hobo code. It's supposed to signal warnings or instructions for those who are familiar with its meaning. The possibility of alchemical ties is pretty valid if you think about how the show engages with toxins, particularly cinnabar. This is a red mercury compound that can cause mercury poisoning. This theory, which emerged on Reddit, suggests that the strange phenomena in the wilderness, including the Red River and the survivors' deteriorating mental states, could be the result of exposure to cinnabar from mining run. It adds up too. Cinnabar is found in Canada, where the show is set, and it can cause significant effects like confusion and hallucinations, similar to the psychoactive experiences that the survivors experience. Despite these theories, the true meaning of the symbol remains elusive. It just keeps showing up throughout the series. We've seen it in rituals in the old timeline, and we've seen it in the investigation of Travis's death in the new timeline. Lottie leads a cult, and she adopts the symbol as a central part of her belief system. She claims that it could offer protection in exchange for blood. The symbol might symbolize a kind of dark bargain of survival through sacrifice. Where do we stand now? The Yellowjackets Season 2 finale had left fans dealing with the deaths of some of the most important characters. We also got some important revelations about the mysterious force known as It. We're, of course, talking about the wilderness here, not any giant clowns or any. The show alternates between the past, where a high school soccer team survives a plane crash, and the present, focusing on the adult survivors. Season 2 fully exposes the consequences of the horrors of cannibalism. This had been only a subtle possibility in Season 1. Lottie continues to play a key role. In the finale, Shauna challenges Lottie, arguing that the horrors were a result of the group's psychological breakdown. It wasn't a supernatural force as Lottie had believed it to be. If Shauna's theory holds, the supernatural element may fade in the adult timeline, and if that is the case, we're in for more psychological drama in Season 3. Whatever the case, the show will continue to be intense and horrific, just the way we like it. Marvelous verdict! The wilderness entity in Yellowjackets is like a beastly presence that you can't see but exists as a ghost somewhere out in the wild. It reminds us of a Lovecraftian cosmic horror where you can't see the threat, but it is there. You don't know if it's really out there or if the dark corners of your mind trick you into creating a monster. We know that the show is heavily inspired by The Lord of the Flies, and that makes us wonder. Maybe the wilderness is indeed a supernatural entity that taps into the minds of the weak. It reminds us that the wild isn't for the faint of heart. You need to be mentally resilient to supernatural forces just as much as you're resilient to physical factors. The alternative is the wild engulfing you in horrors that will haunt you long after you return to civilization. That's all we got for you this time, but if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.